Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn. This is going to be episode 5 of Volunteer Power, the mini-series on the volunteers that make soccer happen. And today is going to be a completely different and interesting perspective because this is coming from a team manager. So I'd like to welcome Kelly Porpora to Heads and Volleys.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Just riding out this quarantine. I mean, it's like a Groundhog Day in some type of a vacuum, right? I mean,
I know.
Same day. Sometimes the weather changes.
Yeah, it's been wild for us right now. We're trying to figure out what return to play looks like. And
I know. And I feel like as a parent, we feel the same way. It's like, on the one hand, I really want my kids to get outside and play with other kids besides each other because the sibling rivalry is at an all-time high.
So have your kids been doing Zoom stuff with soccer?
Not so much. We're temporarily in the Presidio. We have tons of space, so we just go play outside and we opted out of camp. We went full digital, our school, like within 3 days of closure. So that was awesome. But then we had all these Zoom activities and they were extreme Zoom fatigue. Like after doing 6 hours a day on a device with like a 1 hour lunch break, I was like, do you guys want to? And they were like, we don't want to do any more Zoom. Like we want to do
no more Zoom
this summer. Yes, it's a challenge. And I think it's also important then, like that's made me realize what activities they really like specifically for the activity. And then which ones are also like, I mean, soccer, I think a huge part of it is being outside was particularly with the younger, like Madeline she's more tolerant, but I think for like the micro age group, I think them being with friends, right. And being outside there's probably like a 50% of them that participate at that age for that, right. It's not just a love of the game. It's more that they want to have that experience, that exposure, and they want to be able to do that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So you and your husband, Devin, you guys got involved how long ago with youth soccer?
So let's see, Oliver, when we did our very first tot soccer, it's kind of crazy, was before he was 2 years old and he's now 11. So that's a long time, nine years.
Yeah.
We weren't in micro at that point. They were so young. There was no division for them. But we'll just say it's been a long road. It's been totally positive, right? I mean, we did not know, honestly, when we first got into it, I was trying to find Oliver an outlet to move his body and to be outside. And he was the kid who never stopped running. Right. And so we had a great coach. And I remember a friend of ours who was a year older was doing like a tot soccer program. And they're like, well, we don't usually take them before they're like 2.5. And I was like, let's just like drop in and try it. You can decide if it's a good fit. And he couldn't believe that Oliver kept up with everybody. And so then that was that. I mean, he fell in love with the game. I think his first word was ball. So, I mean, that was a clue right there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then, and then, being outside. And then once we sort of got down the line and it became more of a community thing, it was also a great experience. We're both transplants here. And so we've now been in the Bay Area for 20 years. So we've been around, but you always discover new things about the city and new neighborhoods when you're going to these parks that you're like, this is such a little gem. I didn't even know this was here. Right. Because before you have kids, you sort of stick to commercial strips or like, you sort of hike the trails, and so it's been a nice excuse to get out and meet new people and see new places. I think that's another really positive.
That's an interesting perspective too, because in the city, of course, we get allocated fields all over. And some people don't like to travel or they like the local field, the convenient one. So that's an interesting perspective too, to get across the city and see different parts.
Yeah. And I think that's also like because I get that like flack from my parents, like, why do we have these games in the middle of nowhere? And I sort of wish that they did it. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs in Long Island. We would have half of our games would be home games and half would be away games. So I like when it works out that way. It seems like sort of the sweet spot. I mean, I know you guys don't have control, but I like when we get to play sort of from a home field so people get comfortable. And like for some of the more introverted or reserved kids, like sort of having a familiar space sometimes makes them feel like like they're at home and they get a little bit more willing to play. Like none of them want to play keeper. It's really funny with the girls. The boys all wanted to try it out. And with the girls, they're like, I don't want to get hit in the face with the ball, or I'm scared someone's going to kick me, or so it's a really different experience with the two genders. And so I feel like when we play on a familiar field with the girls, particularly, it sometimes enables them to take risks that they wouldn't otherwise be willing to take. But I like, again, getting out. So I feel like it's a nice balance where we've had a couple seasons that it worked out. We sort of played 1 or 2 games at the same field, and then we went someplace, and then we went someplace, and then we came back. And so when you get that balance to like both push them out of their comfort zone, like, in a new setting, and then also in what they're doing on the field, it's a good sort of combination.
That's really interesting too, the idea of the same field in terms of familiarity. Because I remember even playing as a kid, playing on the same field, and it's like knowing the field, feeling comfortable. Yeah. So
you even know where like the potholes are, which sounds crazy, but you're like, oh wait, don't forget about the gopher hole, right?
Home field advantage. Yeah.
There is a little bit of home field advantage, right? And I mean, it varies, right? I mean, there's also, we're blessed in this city to have, larger complexes. So, I mean, if you're always playing at West Sunset, it doesn't necessarily matter which part of West Sunset you're playing on. As long as the field, the location. Yes. And again, some of it corresponds to age and some of it corresponds to, I think even just parents, right? That when the parents get tense about being late because of the parking, then the kids get tense about getting on. And it sounds terrible. Yeah. But like, you always do the buffers of arrival time and they still don't follow it.
So I was going to ask you, that'll lead me into a question about parents too. But first of all, how long have you been a team manager? And has it always been kind of you and Devin doing it together as team manager and coach?
No, it hasn't. So Devin never coached for my son. So he only started coaching when Madeline went into kindergarten. So she's 3rd grade this year. So this will be his 4th year coaching.
Okay.
So we started on the other end where we had an independent coach and we had this group that, again, it was a neighborhood group and it wasn't even like, we didn't have jerseys, but it sort of evolved into this group. And when we first played, it was boys and girls, both of them. And then eventually this group of boys sort of stuck with it. And he said, hey, do you guys want to try doing some games and doing micro soccer? And we were like, sure, we'll try it. And then it sort of just stuck, which was great because we had kids from all different schools. It was totally word of mouth. So I coached with him and they went competitive eventually. So they did, a little time in micro and then they became a competitive team. We played a year competitively with him and a coach working under him. And then we moved to a different club. And so we've had 4 clubs that we've played with in this household. So we've gotten to taste many different flavors, which is also nice because you realize that every club also has a culture on its own. And that when you're shopping, you're not just shopping for your player, you're shopping for your family and for club chemistry and dynamics. It's like school shopping. Yeah. So I managed pretty much from the get-go. I got roped in. I didn't know what I was signing up for. And then it is very much once you know the system, it's much sort of easier to do it. So now when I do it with Madeline, I'm definitely more of the planner, back office person. And then I like to have a co-manager that is much more wants to be gung-ho about snacks because the girls love having lemonade and snacks after their games, and they're being
I like lemonade and snacks after games, so I can only imagine how much the kids like it.
Right, a little social element. So yes. I like having a person who wants to do more of that. It's tons, but the more sort of, not that I don't like the fun stuff, but it's nice to not feel like you're constantly bombarding people all the time with the same voice, and then also sometimes to just say, hey, this funny thing happened, or I haven't heard back from so-and-so. And do you have any idea? Like just another ear in the community, what's going on? Because sometimes it just gives you another contact person. And it's also more practical, right? Like, now that I have felt the amp up in, security, right? Like everybody being fingerprinted, everybody that takes the field. But also just in the seriousness, right? So, I think that SFYS has done a really great job pushing down some things that really used to happen more in competitive soccer and in older soccer down the pipeline to make it more uniform and to, provide accountability, which is great. But it also means that if you don't know the system, there's a lot of pieces to learn. So I think that's part of why I've continued to do it. And I also think mentorship. So I had a parent that helped me, that had a player that also played with the same independent coach who was 2 years older. And so she really held my hand when I was getting on board. And I still sometimes call her to pick her brain about things. And so then I've also done that. So I have two moms, one who manages the other team for my daughter's school in her grade, and then another one who co-manages with me. And she's now mentoring for her son's grade, 3 teams. So you sort of find this, it's sort of like you pass the torch to another person so that then this can sort of keep being a sport with a ton of parent involvement. I think that's important.
So you just triggered something in my mind that we do coach mentorship and coach education, and we do referee mentorship and referee education, but we don't really do anything about managers. And when I'm thinking about a team managers make everything possible, even in the competitive level with the managers that I have. They always show up with game cards. They always have the player cards. All the kids are always in the right gear. Everything is just so organized. And then there's so little that goes into helping team managers. It's kind of like, you're a team manager, you have to do this. You have to get all the kids in the right place, and you have to get everybody registered. You have to make sure everyone's set. But we don't really tell you how, or often if you don't have that mentor or someone to help you along the way. Yeah. So let me ask you, go back to the idea of parents and working with parents. And most coaches will often complain, parents are the problem. It's always about parents. I'm involved in Twitter a lot with coaches, and the number one complaint is always parents. And I've never really had that, because I think I always try and involve parents. And so what have you talked about telling them to get there 20 minutes before the half an hour before the game. So what other tips do you have? What other ways do you kind of help educate or work with parents within the kind of club sport environment?
I think that I really value transparency. So it helps me as a parent when I know, right? I mean, your teachers share at school, right? And your administration shares what they're working on and what they're doing. And so I always tell people, I'm like, I try not to bombard you with information and give you too much, but I also want you to know that there is a ton of work behind the scenes that goes into all these things. And so to be honest with them, and I try to also create realistic timelines. So I've learned to buffer things over the years, but there's always times when something comes up and we need an answer on something, or somebody's scan of their birth certificate, or all of a sudden their picture got deleted, or there's some hiccup, right? That you need something and you need it within 24 hours. I try to not, create a fire when there's no fire. Right. And I think my parents respect that by doing a little planning myself. And again, having a template for that. I have to say I was an early subscriber for TeamSnap, and I've used several other team platforms with other school teams and other sports. And it really is hands down the best one that, for me and for my parent community needs, being able to push out all the information and have it all stored there. I get so many parents and so many families where one parent is the main contact person. And when that person needs to travel for work or get sick, it's like a fire, right? Like it's emergency.
It's
and the
nightmare.
Other parent doesn't know what to do. And so by having a centralized database, I'm like, it's always there. You always know how to log in. And all of my emails are archived. All the information that you need, all of the field locations, everything is in one place. And so I don't really know. I haven't used another software engine that has allowed me to do that. I mean, we use Google Sheets for certain things, but it's still not the same, right? And there's a lot more sort of searching. And so, it's easy to read. It's easy to read from a mobile device, which is key. All of those things are important. So that's one. And then even from the managing side, I can go back and replicate and see when I did things, like when I pushed out certain information and how long it took me between, collecting information and being able to do something. So it sort of lets me plan and project manage a little better. So I would say those two things. I use Google Sheets for a ton of stuff, and I use TeamSnap for overall season. And even just like, we always do an end of season, a more social gathering and a fun practice where we do, parents versus kids, or we do, wear a fun costume, or, whatever. We're going to play with 2 balls, right? Whatever the sort of fun thing that we're going to do is. And so we try to include other family members in that. So we do it sometimes at a different practice time so that it's either later or on a weekend at a park so that, we can have older siblings or younger siblings or, both parents involved. And so we try to plan that very early in the season to make sure that we let everybody gets to be part of it. And again, then everybody dog ears it because it's on their team staff calendar.
That's it. Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
And we get to do that, which is great. And also I even think, the payments has changed a little bit over the years, but it's another great way, you guys collect payments for the league, but sometimes if you want to do something else and, it sort of varies. Rec soccer is a little bit different than competitive soccer. But we also have always cultivated we want everybody to be able to play. And so, or go to the pizza party. And so there was always a way to create, if you want to sponsor somebody else coming to the pizza party too, sort of saying, this is what the pizza party is. If you want to contribute more, it's always welcome. And just sort of, creating transparency around that also so that everybody gets to be part of things.
That's awesome. It's so good to have that set up. And I agree. I mean, even just from the simple level of having my calendar synced up with my team snap and knowing where I need to be and when I need to be there, that's so good. But kind of fostering that team environment, because I was going to ask you about the idea of like teams. And it's within San Francisco, we're pretty fortunate that most recreational teams are schools. So the kids go to school together. Right. The families tend to know each other. But I mean, even across the country, there are groups of recreational kids that are just put together to play soccer. And so the idea of fostering this team and using things like Team Snap to have this I guess, schedule, like we're going to have this pizza party here, we're going to do this. And I know I've used Team Snap as well to say, we have a game out of town at 3 p.m. We're going to meet for lunch at 11 a.m. or at 12 p.m. or whatever the time may be to just help. And it just coordinates everybody to be in the same place at the same time.
Yeah. And we used it even the first coach that we played with, even when our team moved on and other teams moved on, we used to do a drop-in soccer. We used to do Friday night soccer, which was so super fun. And it was like, sort of like a 5 to 6 year spread. So whoever showed up, we would sort of make and balance teams based on that spread. And so we just created exactly a Team Snap group that wasn't actually a formal team. And every time, we do it once or twice a month. And every time there was going to be drop-in soccer on Friday night at whatever given park, we would just post it and push it out to everybody and say, hey, show up if you can. And then whoever was there, we'd like find the closest pizza parlor on Yelp and walk over there. And it was really
awesome.
Really good community builder. And again, really casual, right? Like you don't pay anything. Like we'll be there with the goals and the cones and the jerseys, and you just come. And it was a really good way to do that. Yeah.
That's brilliant. So let me ask you about, so the Glitter Mermaids is one of the teams. And so
it is, and it stuck. I didn't think it was going to stick. That was my daughter named us that. I think she was 6 at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So then I just had to go find glitter, right? I mean, who doesn't need more glitter in their lives for jerseys, right?
Yeah, no. And I come from, I guess, the idea that all the soccer teams should be soccer teams. So they should be Manchester United, they should be Chelsea, or they should be the Portland Thorns. And the idea that then it's like it's relative, and it's like they can, like Little League, you play as the San Francisco Giants or the Oakland A's. Right. And so I've always thought along the lines of saying, well, no, you should be a soccer team name to replicate the big soccer. And then when I joined San Francisco, was it 3-4 years ago, and I met all of these team names, and I coached a team last year called the Raging Bulldogs.
There you go.
It kind of they had ownership. And to go back to what you were saying about the girls feeling comfortable, they must enjoy that they are the Glitter Mermaids. They own that. That's who they belong to.
They do. And they're so funny. I mean, they love to wear their mermaids gear, and they all get these we go full bore. Our socks look like scales and fins, if you've seen us on the field.
I have, yes.
So, and it also helps, again, I think that making the sport accessible. I think that there's lots of different ways to play soccer in the San Francisco Bay Area and levels to play at, but there's still people who, if the parents were never into organized sports, or if the child is more shy or more introverted, or really is out there because they want to be with their friends, whatever makes them feel empowered to get on the field, right? So, I mean, we have to wear our shin guards and our cleats and be safe, But beyond that, there's a lot of flexibility. And I think what having my daughter has made me realize is it's important to have fun with it. And sometimes that's the thing that gets, pulls a girl out of her shell, is they're so excited to be out there, and their jerseys sparkle from so far away if it's a sunny day that you can't miss them. It makes us easy to find when you're in a sea of people. People are like, oh, I saw the hot pink and the glitter. I knew exactly where you were. So it helps. Every little bit helps.
That's brilliant. I'm a convert, I'll admit. Now, I thought that it was crazy and it was silly and everybody should have a professional team name that they can aspire to be, but I'm a convert. I'll give the Glitter Mermaids that.
And it's fun too. I mean, I also think of, we live in a city where I feel like wearing your colors is sort of a theme. And so it really fits us. And I like being out there. I mean, I do also like that the clubs really have an identity. So you can go out there and what club somebody is playing for on the more competitive side. And I think that the players feel that pride in having that uniform. But I think if you're playing with your school or you're playing with your friends, you should do it, right? And have a little fun and experiment. And also, I also think it means that every team is a different experience, and it really lets you embody that. And it's fun. We love seeing people on the field and being like, you're the Bumblebees. That's so cool. And the kids also, a lot of the parents, I think, especially in rec soccer, let the children have input into the name, and you get to hear the stories. Then it's a conversation starter with your opponents, which is also a really good way to break the ice, I think, for the girls, to open the door to, although it can be scary to talk to a kid from a different school that you don't know that you're supposed to be like facing off against, so it's another way to get them excited to be out there.
So then you've had the experience of club and recreational, and there's often a stigma, I think, or like this unwritten pressure of get to club as quick as you can, become a club player as quick as you can, join a club, play competitive soccer. And we do a lot of work with the league for just kind of helping to educate and just give as much advice as we can, that you don't have to play competitive soccer. You don't have to feel like that's the only place you can go play. So I guess my question is really around kind of that whole environment of club soccer and of recreational soccer, that there's a place for everybody. And I think, do you see that there's the pressure like that? Do you see that parents maybe like itching to get to competitive soccer because they think the grass is greener over there, that is going to help their kid get to the next level of college or whatever, even at the younger ages?
Right. I do think that that does happen. I think it's a funny storm of how it happens, in the sense of like when my son ended up in competitive soccer, it felt really organic, right? I mean, we were with the group stayed together. We didn't, nobody set out thinking we were going that direction. And then we ended up there, and it was wonderful. And then we sort of like rode it as long as we could. And then we eventually, it was time for people to move on. And that was a sad thing, but the right thing to do. Yeah. And with my daughter, we've bumped up against this a couple times, right? Because we've just sort of crossed into the age where people start to play competitive more, and we've talked about whether she wanted to do that. And also, it's easier to find like futsal opportunities, for example, if you're with a club, because they sort of manage everything, and then you can just also have access to soccer all winter long. So yes, I do think there is this sort of pressure, but I also think that if you talk to a lot of the really great coaches in the Bay Area individually, when they're not recruiting you at the soccer fair, they will tell you that it's better for younger athletes' bodies to cross-train, to play more than one sport. And if you commit to competitive soccer at a really young age, it's really hard to do that. And it's really then only possible to cultivate body development in different forms of coordination if you also have either a family member who has access to that second sport, or a school that's providing that in some other way, and can manage to Jenga all those things into your very limited schedule. So yes, I do think it's there. And I'm so glad that my daughter is still playing recreational soccer. And if she decides she wants to play competitive soccer in 1 year or 2 year or later, then we'll go down that road again. But I do think it's important to honor both of those things. And I think there's pluses and minuses to both. I think a lot of the
thing about rec soccer is that it's the parent involvement level, like, as you said, it's not, I mean, I guess it is more because they're coaching too, but it's also just, there's less guidance. So it really depends like how well things go and how cohesive things are. A lot of it depends on which parents are involved and what the team is and what everyone's experience is. And so I think if it's possible to create mentorship opportunities, either through schools or through the league or whatever, that might help provide some of those other opportunities, right? To keep that sort of more consistency and have more longevity. Because even if your part of your roster is changing every year, it is easier to keep a group together. Like it's sort of good for their development if there's some new players coming in and mixing it up, but also they get to sort of see how they're developing in regards to the same other kids they've been playing with. But competitive soccer it's a machine, man. Once you get into it, pretty good. They know like just how to keep you going. And it does also have a lot of great, like, as I said, I think that there's always additional practice opportunities, right? If you're with, either because they have another team or they have another coach available, if you want outside time, or because they have lessons available, which, I mean, you guys have been doing a great job also providing outside curriculum, I think, which is more new. That wasn't available when, Oliver was coming up. That was really only something you had access to if you were playing competitive soccer. And then also, I think, field space, right? So where are we allowed to do that? What are the rules? And there is no sort of comprehensive way to just get on and say, here's the day we want to do something, or what's available in my neighborhood and what are the rules. If we don't want to hold weekly practice and once a month we just want to go do XYZ, it's a really cumbersome permit process.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so I think if there was a way to sort of say, if we want to, like this drop-in soccer that we used to do years ago when the field systems were not online the way they are, and there was less accountability, and there was also less demand for fields. And we literally could just like go to a park in a neighborhood because we only had, 10 or 12 kids, and it was okay, right? We weren't doing, and if we were in somebody's way, or somebody's dog came running through the game, that was just part of the game, right? It just didn't work. So I think it's also just, community and neighborhood, and we all have to decide that that's something we want to nurture and then figure out how to make that possible.
I think you're right too about club soccer being a machine, because I'm in the club soccer environment too. And so I know the club I work for has resources that can get additional fields or non-city fields. So like the universities or high schools that have fields that we can get access to. So then you go from playing within the city recreational program once or twice a week, maybe a third if you've got some sort of pickup program going on or some other clinic, to scheduled 3 practices at least, sometimes a 4th as well, and then some sort of specialized training too. It makes sense why people would want to move towards the club environment. I definitely understand that. And I think what we do with the organization, part of my role is more programming like that, is more supplemental stuff that shows people you can still do all of this without actually joining a club or without feeling like you can join a club. And it's not that we don't want to take away, and there's definitely a place for kids, I think, in the competitive environment, but often when players leave and they don't necessarily need to, teams fall apart. And especially if they're school teams and there's 12 kids on a team and 3 decide to move on, that team falls apart. And now we always try and put players, teams that have fallen apart together with other teams, but it's outside of a comfort zone, or it's a different place. It's another side of the city. It's all completely new. And once they play for a few years and it doesn't work anymore, I think that's where we find some of the attrition, and we lose those kids, unfortunately. And so part of our drive as SFYS is to keep kids playing, and by offering more and more things for them to play within, help them stay. So if they just want to train once a week and play in a game, they can do that. And if they want to take supplemental stuff, they can.
Right. And even, I mean, like I said, and it's amazing, like the logistics that can become overwhelming, which sounds crazy. But I mean, I know you guys have the office available to always have meetings, but a lot of people are like, oh, I can't get there, or the hours don't work for me. And I'm like, well, you guys know that you can rent a room at the public library for free. Like if you're a San Francisco resident, you have a library card, you can rent it for a meeting. And people are like, no, I mean, I can't. I've literally, after hundreds of parents telling them this information, I've maybe met 2 that knew this, right? And again, it's just resources that are out there, which you're like, well, just to have like, because you need to at some point put your heads together to talk about whether you're going to stay together or whether people are going to go competitive, or you just have logistical stuff that you need to take care of. Right. So, and it's hard to do those things right after a soccer game when your kids are all going crazy and the next team's trying to come on and the referee's yelling at you to get off the field. And you're like, I'm sorry, we're just having So, again, mentorship, I think, helps create that. And even like going through the Parks and Rec field permit process, right? And knowing who to call. I think there's definitely, I will say, in the soccer community, a lot of knowing who to call, right? If you have a question about something. And I think, like I said, I still sometimes reach out to, my old mentor or a coach I know from a different club, or a team manager I know from a different club. And I was like, what was that thing you were telling me about? So to just get the information that I need. And I tend to be a person that's less shy about that, but I know it gets overwhelming. And I think that that's a huge part of soccer success in the Bay Area. I think that if we could all figure out a way to pool our resources and be friendly about it, instead of like, sort of having a leg up and because we got better practice slots and sort of elbowing each other out, then it would be really positive. And I'm wondering if as the field shrinks a little bit because of the pandemic and our ability to play changes, that focus might shift, because those of us who want to keep doing it, we need each other, right? Like we need opponents or
That's a good point. Yeah.
And it gives us an opportunity to sort of reframe and say, here's what's working really well, and maybe here's what's not. And, how do we make this a safe experience and a positive experience for everybody in this sort of new world of or in the pandemic, but hopefully someday post-pandemic. Yeah.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. The idea of this Volunteer Power series was to show that soccer doesn't happen without people like you, for the work that you do, for the hours that you do spend as a volunteer. And like you say, even the idea of mentoring and sharing what you know and then empowering other people to then empower their players to play, whether that's finding a middle school gym or whether that's finding another place to play on a random Friday night in the middle of the city somewhere. So I just want to thank you from San Francisco Youth Soccer and from me as well, because this is the game that I love. This is the game that I grew up doing. I moved to the US 11 years ago and was continuing to pursue soccer. And so speaking to somebody who empowers players the way you do, I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm happy to do it. And we're so thankful for everything that you guys do. I mean, I wouldn't have done anything in this entire 9 years that I've been at this if it wasn't for SFYS. So, it's a reciprocal feeling.
All for the power of the game. So thank you so much, and go Glitter Mermaids is my sign off on that one.
I've said it over and over again in this mini-series, and I'll honestly continue to say it, because the game doesn't happen without wonderful volunteers like Kelly and the other 4 that I've interviewed so far. So make sure you thank your team manager. Make sure you thank the volunteers that are in the background, making sure that your kids are in the right place and making sure that you get a meeting space that you're looking for all the time, or they have the ins and outs of knowing how to get into the library and using a library room, or making sure that everybody is at least wearing the same color glitter socks. So again, a huge thank you to Kelly, a huge thank you to all of the volunteers that make soccer happen.